Hi, my name is Marlene. Last December, by pure accident, I overheard my older sister and younger sister plotting to turn me into the Christmas babysitter for 5 children. To them, I wasn't a daughter, a sister, or even a person with plans of my own. I was a free resource, an invisible pair of hands holding their holiday together. Year after year, they scripted my life without asking, and I performed like it was my duty. But what happens when the helper finally stops helping, when the silence ends and the whole system begins to crack? The first snow of December had just begun to settle, dusting the sidewalks like sifted sugar and softening the edges of the world outside my apartment. Under the glow of the streetlights, the flakes looked almost deliberate, tiny white secrets floating down, layering the street in silence. From my window, the lights blurred just enough to make the city feel distant, like something painted just beyond glass. Inside, I was stringing white lights across the window pane, carefully tucking them between the curtain hooks and the wood trim. They cast a soft, forgiving glow against the frosty darkness. My living room smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon from a small candle on the coffee table. Holiday cards were spread across the couch beside me, half-written. A gold pen rested in my lap, and a stack of blank gift tags sat by my knee. My handwriting on the tags was neat but rushed, names looped with care, but not joy. Jason's coat still hung by the door, slung over the back of the chair he always claimed when he visited. He'd stopped by for lunch earlier and left it, promising he'd return after his afternoon call. His absence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like breath held. The radio played soft carols in the background, nothing upbeat, just the slow kind with bells and piano. I listened absently as I tied a ribbon around a small box of cookies I planned to give my neighbor. I'd gotten good at making my space look warm, even when my heart felt careful. At 36, living alone in Bellevue, I had created my own small world of rituals and safety, comfort that didn't depend on anyone else to sustain it. But this year, I dared to hope for something different. I had told Jason that this Christmas he would finally see the big family holiday I always talked about. The noisy kitchen, the cluttered dining table, my sisters laughing too loudly, my mom lighting the same mismatched candles she always pulled out of a drawer and pretending they were new. I wanted him to know that part of me, not the curated quiet version, but the real, unfiltered chaos of the clan I came from. I had planned the whole thing in my head, what cookies to bake, which wines Jason liked, how I'd introduce him to the cousins. I even practiced what I would say to my sisters when they inevitably started assigning chores, that I wasn't available every minute this time. That I wasn't showing up as a volunteer coordinator. I was bringing someone. I was coming as a guest, a participant, not a default. 2 days later, I drove across the bridge to my mother's house for what she described in the group chat as a quick holiday planning meeting. The sky was still gray, the kind of northwest winter that leaves a cold shadow over everything, even without snow. The windshield wipers squeaked intermittently. I wore a cream sweater and a wool coat that Jason liked, and I had a reusable shopping bag in the passenger seat with holiday napkins and a delicate glass ornament I'd bought for Mom's tree. I told myself it was a kind gesture, that I wasn't trying to impress anyone, but part of me hoped that showing I'd thought ahead might shift something. The front door was unlocked, as always, so I let myself in quietly. The smell of cinnamon candles hit me first, my mom's favorite. I smiled automatically, expecting to find her in the kitchen. I imagined her fussing with ribbons or boiling water for tea, humming along with some old Bing Crosby track. Instead, I froze just inside the hallway. Voices filtered in from the kitchen. I recognized them immediately, Isolde's and Leora's. Isolde's voice was low and efficient, like always. "So Marlene will take the kids after dinner, like usual. I'll do the blessing and handle the playlist. You cover desserts, that checks the boxes." Leora's laugh followed, a soft chime. "She's single anyway. It's not like she has plans." Their laughter layered together, an easy blend of certainty and dismissal. Not cruel, just confident. That made it worse. My hand tightened around the handles of the shopping bag. The paper inside crinkled audibly, but they didn't hear. "I'll text her later," Isolde added. "No need to make it a thing. She always says yes. She's good with the kids." My stomach twisted. The words weren't shocking exactly. They were just too familiar. Words I'd spent years trying not to hear or believe. And yet, here they were, out loud, unfiltered, spoken when no one thought I was listening. A confirmation that my role had never been questioned. I stepped into the kitchen doorway. They didn't look up. They were huddled over a binder on the table. Thick, laminated, marked with color-coded tabs. Pages flipped as Isolde ran her finger down a checklist. Leora sipped tea from a holiday mug with a candy cane handle. On the fridge hung a printout titled in bold block letters, Holiday Responsibilities, 2023. My name was in nearly every column. Marlene, childcare. Marlene, gift wrapping. Marlene, post-dinner cleanup. Marlene, stocking fillers. Under hosts, Isolde had spiritual coordinator. Leora had desserts and guest seating. No one listed Jason. No one had asked if he was coming. I stepped back quietly, boots sinking into the rug. The smell of cinnamon turned too sweet. I passed through the living room like a ghost, past framed family photos and a mantle already lined with stockings that I had hung last year. My own had my name spelled wrong, again. Outside, the air bit colder. The sky was still spitting flakes, thin and hesitant. I walked to my car in a kind of daze, the bag of napkins still swinging by my side. My hands were shaking slightly, not from anger, but from the weight of clarity. The drive home felt long. I kept replaying their words. Not the assignments, I'd done worse for family, but the ease of it, the assumption, the entitlement to my time. They hadn't even paused to ask. They didn't think I had a life that needed asking about. By the time I parked outside my apartment, dusk had fallen. My own string lights glowed softly from the window, a warm invitation that no one else would answer. I stepped inside, took off my coat, and set the shopping bag down with more force than I meant to. I walked to the closet and pulled down the holiday storage box labeled Christmas binder. Inside were laminated menus, game cards, grocery lists, name tags from old tablescapes, a recipe plan with oven times. I had once loved putting these together. It felt like a way to create magic for people I loved. Now, each page felt like a receipt. I sat on the couch, flipping through them slowly, the edges worn from years of care. These pages were pieces of my time I had given freely, generously, lovingly, but never on my terms, always on theirs. I closed the binder gently, exhaled, and whispered to the quiet room. They really never saw me, did they? The lights glowed on. The snow continued to fall outside, soft and soundless, but inside me, something had shifted. I sat in my apartment long after I'd gotten home, the world outside already deep in winter darkness. The hum of the car engine still rang in my ears like a phantom vibration, the kind that lingers even when the motion has stopped. The white string lights I'd tacked around the window glowed faintly, casting soft reflections on the glass. It was a cozy scene by most standards, a quiet moment with a holiday card in hand, but my mind was anything but still. I turned the card over and over in my fingers. The edge of it, just slightly rough, caught on my thumb each time it passed. The card was one of those generic ones from a cousin who still used glitter and gold foil, covered in smiling faces, perfectly spaced cursive, and a phrase like, "Love makes a house a home." But the words I couldn't escape weren't written there. They were from earlier that day. Overheard, uninvited, spoken too casually to be cautious. She's single anyway. It wasn't just the words that cut, it was how they were said, as if I were some kind of default setting in the family machine, always available, always plugged in, like an extra appliance in the kitchen, left running just in case someone needed me. I reached for my phone and opened up our old family group text, the one that used to buzz constantly with logistics, memes, and inside jokes. December had been particularly active. Scroll after scroll of holiday arrangements, kid drop-off plans, baking assignments, carpool shifts, event reminders. Can you pick up the kids at 3? Would you mind baking an extra batch? You're the best, Marlene. On the surface, it was all warm, grateful, loving even. But underneath, every message had a current running through it, a quiet command cloaked in praise, and every time I had tried to gently suggest no, Someone responded with a guilt-wrapped compliment. "You've always been amazing with them. You're the only one who really gets how to manage everything. We don't know what we'd do without you." Reading it now, in one long scroll, it felt less like conversation and more like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I was building. A pattern laid bare. The next afternoon, I told myself I'd stop by Mom's place just to drop off the wreath Jason had picked out for her. But really, I needed to see for myself. Was I imagining this? Had I made too much of one overheard comment? Maybe I'd built a whole internal narrative off a passing thought. The drive there was gray and damp. Typical Northwest winter, the kind where the roads are always wet and the clouds hang low like tired curtains. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see her through the front window. She was pacing the living room with her cordless phone pressed to her ear. Yes, everything's handled," she said, her voice carrying through the barely cracked window. "Thank goodness we have Marlene. She's not busy like the others." I froze just inside the threshold, one hand still on the doorknob. The words landed with precision, not dramatic, not cruel, but with clinical finality. It wasn't said with malice. If anything, she probably thought it was a compliment, but it still felt like a verdict. She ended the call and turned, smiling. "Sweetheart, you're here early," she said, kissing my cheek like nothing had just happened. "I was just telling Patty how reliable you are. Not many people your age can say that." I forced a smile and handed her the wreath. "Jason picked it out." She took it and nodded approvingly. "He has good taste," she said, already moving into the kitchen to hang it somewhere. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't notice I hadn't taken off my coat. I followed her in, quietly. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and something savory. It always did in December. The familiar comfort of it didn't hit like it used to. "Mom," I started, careful. "What if I didn't help with the kids this year?" She blinked, mid-movement, as if I'd said something in a different language. "Why wouldn't you?" I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could say a word, my phone buzzed. A message from Leora. "Wait, are you okay? Are you stressed? You've always been amazing with them." There it was again. The same sugar-coated leash, as if my capacity to help had become part of the family infrastructure. I typed, "I'm just thinking about changing things up," but I didn't send it. I just stared at the screen while Mom continued humming and moving things around the kitchen like I hadn't said anything at all. On the drive home, I started noticing things I'd ignored for years. How Isolde's name was never attached to group messages that required action. How Leora posted photos of family traditions online, gingerbread houses, matching pajamas, without ever mentioning who actually planned and set it all up. It wasn't about one holiday or one task. It was about the role I had been assigned without a vote. My time had become communal property, borrowed on the assumption that I owed it. And the praise I had once clung to as proof of being seen now looked more like the ribbon on a box of obligations I hadn't signed up to carry. That night, lying in bed, I stared up at the ceiling. The lights from the window, still glowing softly, cast shifting patterns above me, and all I could hear, looping again and again in my head, was my mother's voice. "She's not busy like the others." And just like that, it no longer sounded like a compliment. It sounded like a reason, a justification, an excuse for never asking me what I actually wanted. I sat up, reached for my notebook, and wrote a single line. "Being reliable isn't the same as being loved." Then I turned off the lights. And for the first time in a long time, I let my phone buzz without looking. I sat on the edge of the couch, blinking at my half-decorated tree, the one I had always tried to make look like something out of a Hallmark movie. My fingers toyed with an unhooked ornament, tiny glass skates I'd found at a holiday market 3 years ago. I used to think they were charming. Now they looked like something I'd bought for a script I didn't even write. The room was still, except for the steady hum of the heater and the soft classical music I had left playing earlier. I got up slowly, not ready for bed, not ready for anything that required thinking. I headed toward the hallway closet, more out of habit than purpose. Somewhere in the back, behind a stack of throw pillows and a box of burnt-out lights, I found the plastic bin labeled Christmas Mists. I dragged it out, sat cross-legged on the floor, and pried off the lid. Inside was a mix of leftover wrapping paper, a box of tangled lights I'd been meaning to toss, and beneath it all, a stack of old VHS tapes. My parents had converted some into digital years ago, but a few originals still sat untouched. One of them was marked Xmas 2001, Lyora's First Baby. I carried it over to the small TV I used in the guest room, where I still kept an old combo player for emergencies like these. It took a few minutes to queue up. The footage was grainy, a little warped at the edges. The screen flickered between scenes of laughter, clinking glasses, and a montage of family moments. Then it cut to a shaky, handheld view of me, 16 years old, wearing a red sweater, my hair pulled into a frizzy ponytail. I was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by 4 kids, 2 of them not even mine to watch. I was helping them glue together paper ornaments while the adults could be heard joking in the background. "You're a natural," someone off camera said. I couldn't tell who. Probably my mother. I watched myself pass out markers, wipe a runny nose, and gently redirect a tantrum. In the corner of the screen, my older sister Isolda sat on the couch, wine glass in hand, laughing with someone about their job. Leora, with her new baby, wasn't even in the room. I didn't cry right away. It was a slow ache, the kind that builds like fog, gradual, chilling. I paused the tape, the screen freezing on my teenage face mid-smile. That version of me had no idea this would be the start of her life's unspoken job description. The pattern had started so long ago, I hadn't even noticed it anymore. I'd been assigned a role so seamlessly that it felt like breathing, until now. I turned off the TV, rewound the tape, and put everything back. Then I grabbed my phone, intending to check the time, but a notification caught my eye. A new message from Leora had popped up earlier, asking if I could help her find that gingerbread cookie recipe we used last year. I responded with a thumbs up, not because I was agreeing, but because I didn't know what else to say. That was the moment I decided to get up, go for a walk, and clear my head. The night air was colder than expected. Bellevue in December could be mild one day, icy the next. I zipped my jacket and walked down the block. A few houses still had their Christmas lights blinking awkwardly in patterns. I stopped in front of one that had a huge inflatable Santa and an illuminated archway, thinking, not for the first time, that some families really leaned into the whole picture-perfect thing. Back home 20 minutes later, I was just about to hang up my coat when my phone buzzed again, this time from Leora's phone. "Hey, can you check my email real quick?" She'd asked earlier at Mom's, and I had. Her password was still auto-saved, but now, as I scrolled up to close out her inbox, something caught my eye. A group message thread titled, "Christmas 2023, Coordination." I hesitated, then clicked. The emails weren't cruel. That would have been easier. They were practical, bullet-pointed. A spreadsheet was attached. My name was mentioned multiple times, once under Santa Prep, again under Kids Activities Lead, and then, most painfully, under Cleanup Captain. I wasn't on the recipient list. They had organized the entire holiday without me, but still assigned me half the labor. No one had even thought to include me in the conversation, but they had no problem penciling me in for the work. I sat at her kitchen table for a few more minutes, not even pretending to look for that recipe anymore. Leora came in, talking on the phone, and waved at me as she passed through the dining room. I didn't bring it up. I just left. By the time I was back in my car, it had started to rain. Not a downpour, just a slow, icy drizzle that tapped at the windshield like a gentle reminder that winter was far from over. I drove in silence, no music, no thinking, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for imagining what it might be like to disappear from the entire holiday altogether. No dramatic exits, no tantrums, just not showing up. Maybe they'd notice. Maybe they wouldn't. I pulled into my parking space, walked up to my apartment, and stood in the doorway, looking at the lights still glowing on my half-done tree. I didn't move toward it. I didn't reach for the box of ornaments still sitting nearby. I just stood there, letting the realization settle. They had been scripting me for decades, and I, foolishly, quietly, had followed every cue, played every part, and called it love. Not anymore. I woke up before dawn, the same dull heaviness pressing against my chest. My half-decorated tree still glowed faintly in the living room as I moved quietly around my apartment, making coffee I wasn't even sure I wanted. The scent filled the kitchen, warm but bitter, and it reminded me of mornings before big events at work, when I had to brace myself for too many demands. Jason texted around 7. "I'll pick you up at 9. We'll bring the groceries and decorations together." I stared at the message for a moment before typing back, "Okay, thanks." It was the first time in years I wasn't planning to arrive at my mother's house alone. 2 hours later, Jason pulled into my driveway, his truck loaded with specialty groceries he'd ordered for me: organic produce, a fresh wreath, some handcrafted candles. He'd even picked up extra lights because I'd mentioned how mine had burned out. We loaded everything carefully and set off. The drive to Mom's house was quiet at first. Jason tried to lighten the mood, talking about a new restaurant he wanted to take me to after the holidays, but I found myself staring out the window at the winter landscape, bare trees swaying against a pale gray sky. It was mid-December in Bellevue, the kind of cold that looked soft but seeped into your bones. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked festive: garlands across the porch, a big wreath on the door, warmth on the outside. My stomach tightened anyway. Isolde opened the door before I even knocked. "Oh, great, the groceries are here," she said, not looking at me, her eyes flicking instead to Jason. "Could you bring that into the kitchen and then help with the boxes in the garage?" Jason paused, his arms full of shopping bags. "Sure," he said slowly, glancing at me as if to check whether he'd misheard. "This is Jason," I said evenly. "My partner." "Oh," she murmured, her tone bright but her face unreadable. "Thanks for helping, Jason." She was already halfway down the hall before I could respond. Inside, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and something roasting in the oven. Leora was perched on a bar stool scrolling through her phone. She waved vaguely without looking up. "Hi, Marlene." "Oh, is that the delivery guy?" I forced a smile. "No, this is Jason." She blinked, then said, "Well, thank goodness we have him too." Jason put the bags down on the counter quietly. Later, he would tell me he noticed how no one actually introduced themselves to him. Right then, I just felt my cheeks flush hot. After we unloaded the groceries, Jason stepped outside to take a call. I stayed in the kitchen, arranging items on the counter more for something to do than because it mattered. My mother's voice floated from the living room, where she was on the phone with someone. "Thank goodness we have Marlene," she said, her words carrying easily through the open doorway. "She's not busy like the others." The words stung more than they should have. I had heard them before, variations of them anyway, but hearing them with Jason in the next room made them louder somehow. At dinner that night, the table was crowded. Jason sat next to me, polite and steady, even as conversation drifted around us. The food smelled wonderful. The laughter was easy, for everyone else. Then one of Leora's children, a sweet-faced little boy with jam on his fingers, looked up at me and asked in a clear, innocent voice, "Why don't you have kids, Aunt Marlene? Is it because no one married you?" The room went still. Then a muffled laugh bubbled up from somewhere down the table. I didn't look to see who it was. My throat felt tight, but I smiled gently at the boy. "Sometimes people choose different timelines," I said softly. Jason's hand found mine under the table. I didn't pull away. The rest of dinner was a blur. I heard bits of conversation about office parties, ski trips, gift exchanges, but none of it landed. When we finally excused ourselves, Jason drove us back to my apartment in near silence. Back home, I changed into sweats and sat on the edge of my bed. Jason came in with 2 mugs of tea, set them on the nightstand, and sat beside me. "Do they always treat you like this?" he asked quietly. I stared at my hands. "Sometimes worse," I said finally. He exhaled slowly. "We don't have to go to Christmas, you know." I shook my head. "If I walk away, I become the villain in their story." "Or maybe," he said gently, "you finally become the author." His words hung in the air like a challenge. I lay awake long after he'd fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling, hearing my nephew's question echo in my mind. "Why don't you have kids? Why don't you have kids?" as if my entire worth boiled down to what I hadn't produced for them to use. By the time the clock glowed 2 a.m., I had stopped crying. My face felt stiff, but my mind was moving, sorting, cataloging every slight, every expectation, every unspoken demand. For the first time in years, my anger wasn't mixed with guilt. It was clean, like ice water. Jason stirred beside me, reached out a hand in his sleep, and I took it. Not because I was fragile, but because I wanted to remember there were still people who saw me without a script. I didn't answer Jason right away. He was still sitting beside me on the bed, the tea between us now cooling in untouched mugs. His words, "Maybe you finally become the author," had planted something. Not defiance exactly, but recognition. I'd always thought I needed to be agreeable to be loved, useful to be kept, expected to be grateful, just to be present. The next morning, I stayed in bed longer than usual, not scrolling my phone, not checking my email. I stared at the ceiling, where shadows danced softly with the movement of the blinds. Jason had gone home late the night before, after kissing my forehead and saying, "Text me when you're ready to burn it all down, or just leave it all behind." It made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because he was the first person in years who gave me permission to walk away. Around 10, I finally got up, wrapped a scarf around myself, and made a quiet breakfast. The eggs were overcooked. I didn't care. I moved around the apartment slowly, letting the silence stretch. When I reached for the extra ornament hooks in the hallway closet, a small plastic box tumbled down. It hit the floor with a dull thud. I crouched to pick it up and noticed something underneath the lining, an envelope tucked behind the drawer panel. It was yellowed, the paper brittle with age. My name was written in my father's handwriting, slanted and neat. For Marlene, when the silence starts to feel heavy. I stared at it, heart caught between dread and tenderness. I sat back against the hallway wall, legs folded beneath me, and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of notepad paper. Marlene, if you're reading this, I imagine you're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. You've always carried more than people see. You help without asking. You fill the gaps. But sweetheart, being the glue doesn't mean you have to be invisible. Support is love. Servitude isn't. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. Dad. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't name names. But I broke. Not the kind of breaking that leaves you shattered. This was the kind that rearranges you. I sat there on the hallway floor, tears slipping down my face, and whispered aloud, "I'm done." I folded the letter back up carefully, like it was glass, and walked to my bedroom. I reached for the holiday binder, still sitting near my dresser, the one I used every year to plan Christmas. I opened it, then closed it again, then shoved it into the bottom drawer. That afternoon, while making tea, my phone buzzed. Leora. Leora. Hey, random question. Can you double-check the caterer sent the nut-free confirmation for the boys? I know I already booked them, but just want to be sure. You always think of that stuff. I stared at the message. I didn't even feel mad. Just done. Me. I'm not available this year. I trust you've got it covered. There was no response for a full hour. Then, Leora. Wait, are you okay? You sound off. Did something happen? Typical. If I didn't perform, I must be broken. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out a fresh notebook and started writing out what I needed to do. Not for Christmas, for me. Later that evening, I called Mom. She picked up on the second ring. Oh, good. I was just about to call you. Leora said something weird, said you might not help this year? I wanted to talk to you about that, I said evenly. Well, I hope it's nothing serious. I know things can feel overwhelming sometimes, especially during the holidays. Mom, I interrupted gently. I might not be coming this year. There was a pause. A long one. I'm sorry, what? I need to do something different. For myself. But this is Christmas, Marlene. You're part of how it all works. Exactly, I said. I've been part of how it all works. For years, without asking if I wanted to be. Silence again. I don't understand, she said softly. Everyone counts on you. That's the problem, Mom. Everyone counts on me. But no one counts me. I didn't mean it to sound like a jab. It came out calm, plain, just true. She started to say something, but I gently said I had to go, that I'd send her something nice for the dinner, and hung up. That night, I wrapped each gift I had already bought, still personalized, still thoughtful. I labeled each one, then packed them into a large shipping box. Alongside them, I placed a single card addressed to my family. Inside, it read, "This year, I'm not coming. I've carried a role I didn't agree to for too long. I love you, but love doesn't mean self-erasure. Merry Christmas, Marlene." Then I sat on the couch, staring out at the blinking lights across the street, feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. I hit send and stared at the screen for a long second. I'm not available for Christmas childcare. Please plan accordingly. Simple, clear, no apology. It wasn't just a text. It felt like the quiet slamming of a door that had been open too long. The message was still fresh in the thread when I tucked my phone into my coat pocket and stepped out into the cold. I had deliveries to make, each gift already wrapped, each tag handwritten with care, each one still coming from love. I wasn't cutting ties. I was cutting expectations. By the time I reached Mom's, the sky had dimmed into that golden haze of late afternoon. Jason waited in the car, offering to come in, but I asked him to give me a moment. I needed to do this alone. Inside, the house was already buzzing with voices. Dorothy stood in the kitchen with Leora, both of them chatting over cookie trays. Isolde's voice filtered in from the dining room where she was adjusting the centerpiece. Of course she was. I placed the gift bags near the tree. Each one was tied with ribbon, filled with a small ornament I had crafted myself, cookies, and a book I'd picked out for each child. I didn't expect gratitude. I didn't even want it anymore, but I had done this every year for a decade, and this year it would be the last. Leora saw me first. "Oh my gosh, you made these again?" She reached into a bag and pulled out one of the hand-painted snowflake ornaments. Before I could say anything, she turned to her kids and shouted, "Look what Auntie Leora made!" I opened my mouth to correct her, but then stopped. Nobody looked my way. Nobody hesitated. Isolde, who had now joined us, chuckled lightly. She really outdoes herself, every year. And then she said it. Seriously, I don't know what we'd do without Leora. It was a strange kind of sting, sharp but distant, like getting pricked after you've already gone numb. Dinner passed in a blur. I kept my words brief, smiled when necessary. Stayed present, physically, but somewhere else entirely inside. Jason was seated between two cousins he didn't know. He looked at me once across the table, brow furrowed in quiet concern, but didn't say anything. After dessert, the kids began to tear into their gifts. Wrapping paper flew across the room in chaotic waves. One of Leora's twins picked up a bag and held it high. "This one's from Aunt Leora," he said proudly. I didn't flinch. From across the room, a small voice called out, "Helper lady, juice, please." At first, I didn't think they were talking to me. Then the same toddler repeated it louder. "Helper lady, I want juice." The adults burst out laughing. "They know who takes care of them, huh?" Isolde quipped. Even Mom smiled. "It's instinct. Kids always know who they can rely on." I nodded slowly and stood up. As I walked to the kitchen, something shifted inside me. Not a break, a clean, silent snap, like a string pulled too taut for too long. And I knew this was the last time they'd ever treat me like furniture with a smile. After helping the child with his juice, because I was raised better, I returned to the dining room. I waited until the laughter died down, until the second wave of dessert started circulating. Then I cleared my throat. "Thank you for letting me be part of tonight," I said. My voice was soft, but everyone heard it. Mom looked up. Leora froze with a fork halfway to her mouth. Isolde blinked. "I just wanted to let you all know. I'll be traveling over the holidays, so this is the last family event I'll be attending this season." A beat of silence followed. Isolde's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, traveling?" Leora added, "Wait, what? You didn't say anything about this before." "I hadn't decided until recently," I replied. "But I've booked a trip. It's something I need." Mom looked genuinely surprised. "But you always stay for Christmas. What about the scavenger hunt?" "The snowman pancakes?" I won't be here, I said again, gently but firmly. I've left instructions for everything. The binder's still in the cabinet. You'll manage. There were no further questions, just silence and the clink of forks and plates. No one argued, no one offered to understand. They just sat there, stunned that I would dare remove myself from the machine they assumed I would always fuel. I left not long after. Jason and I walked out together, the air between us full of the kind of quiet that only comes when something big has shifted. He didn't speak until we were halfway home. "You okay?" he asked. I looked out at the streetlights streaking past the windshield and smiled. I think I might be. Back at home, I packed my suitcase. Not out of spite, but with peace. I folded my favorite sweater, slipped in the novel I'd been meaning to read for 2 years, and zipped it shut. I left one last thing behind the next morning. While Mom was out, I stopped by the house and placed a manila folder on the kitchen counter. The label on the front read, "If I'm not here, how to manage without me." Inside, I left notes for how to run the schedule, who to call for the catering company, the timeline for Santa's arrival, even a diagram of the tree for symmetry. I wasn't being cruel, I was being clear. Before I left, I sent a final message in the family group chat. "I'm not available for Christmas childcare. Please plan accordingly." Then I muted the thread. The text had been out in the world for less than a day when I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, laptop open. I'd written and deleted the email a dozen times, but now it was finished, sitting in the draft folder like a sealed envelope. I hesitated for one last second, then hit send. The subject line read, "Why I won't be home this Christmas." I didn't write it to accuse. I wrote it because, after decades of being the one to hold everything together, I finally understood that holding it together had cost me more than it gave back. I poured the details into the email, years of late-night cleanups, early morning grocery runs, last-minute gift wrapping, the times I canceled trips or dates to be available. "I love you all," I typed at the end, "but I need a Christmas where I am not a resource. I hope you'll understand." When I pressed send, a small relief unspooled in my chest. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater. Outside, the city shimmered in holiday lights, each strand bright but separate. By noon, my phone began buzzing. A cousin replied first. "I'm proud of you. This needed to be said." Another forwarded my email to a wider group, adding, "We've all leaned on her too much." Within 24 hours, 2 uncles and one of Mom's church friends wrote back saying they wouldn't be attending Christmas dinner this year. "We can't support how you've been treated," one wrote. "We'll sit this one out." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. All I could do was stare at my phone as the messages stacked up like dominoes falling. Then Mom called. Her voice was tight, almost breaking. "What have you done, Marlene?" I steadied my tone. I told the truth. "You've thrown everything into chaos," she said. "Do you know how many people are canceling? Do you know the kids are going to be devastated?" "I do," I said quietly. "But I'm devastated every year, Mom. You just never noticed." There was silence on the line, then a sigh. "This isn't you. You've always been the strong one." "Maybe being strong for everyone else was never actually strength," I said. "Maybe it was just fear of disappointing you." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from guilt, but from the weight sliding off my shoulders. By evening, my sisters had joined the fray. Isolde sent a long text accusing me of being dramatic, manipulative, and ruining Christmas for the kids. She tried to rally everyone on a new group chain without me. Screenshots of her attempts found their way back to me through a cousin. Leora was silent at first. Then, late that night, a short message appeared from her. "I didn't know it hurt you that much. You could have said something." I stared at it for a long time. There was no space left in me to respond. Jason arrived early on Christmas Eve, suitcase in one hand, coffee in the other. "Ready?" he asked softly. I nodded. We loaded our bags into his car and drove to the airport. The roads were nearly empty, snow flurries swirled like feathers. For once, I wasn't racing from store to store, balancing lists and expectations. For once, I was heading somewhere just for me. At the airport, people hurried past with wrapped boxes and children in tow. Jason reached for my hand as we boarded the plane. "You okay?" I think so, I said. It feels different. As the plane lifted off, the city fell away beneath us, its grid of lights like strands of tinsel scattered across a dark floor. I pressed my forehead to the window and exhaled. I don't feel guilty, I whispered. You shouldn't, Jason said. Palm Springs greeted us with sunshine and dry warmth, a jarring contrast to the damp gray back home. We checked into a quiet resort, cream walls, palm trees, a pool that shimmered even in winter light. In the room, I unpacked slowly, as though setting each item down were a small act of claiming my own life. On Christmas morning, I woke without an alarm. No lists, no children knocking on the door, no frantic texts about missing batteries or last-minute errands. Jason was still asleep. I brewed coffee and stepped onto the balcony. The air smelled like citrus and possibility. Then my phone buzzed. 42 missed messages lit up the screen. The thread was a tangle of confusion, frustration, and panic. Photos of a half-set table, questions about schedules, complaints about who should play Santa, and at the top, a single voice memo from Mom. I pressed play. Her voice was trembling. The kids are crying. No one knows what to do. And I think I finally understand. I stood there a long time, the phone warm in my hand, the mountains rising in the distance, like a promise. When I put down my phone that morning in Palm Springs, the mountains outside our balcony glowed like a watercolor painting, soft and sure. Jason was still asleep, his breathing steady. For a long moment, I held the phone to my chest. My mother's voice, shaken, cracked, almost childlike, had replayed in my ears. The kids are crying. No one knows what to do. And I think I finally understand. Back in Bellevue, the day was already unraveling. Later, I would see it all unfold through texts, voicemails, and a shaky video one of the cousins sent. Without me there, the machine that had been humming for decades sputtered to a stop. The catering truck that Isolde thought she had confirmed never arrived. She'd forgotten to finalize the payment. Panic spread like smoke. And there were no trays of turkey, no warm rolls, no pre-made pies. Dorothy tried to salvage the day by throwing together whatever was in the pantry, but her hands trembled, and the ham burned black on one side. Kids wailed in the background while adults scrambled. The perfect holiday, without its silent worker, collapsed in real time. Watching the video later, I noticed details that once would have been invisible. How no one knew where the napkins were. How the stockings still lay in a pile instead of hung neatly. How the gifts sat unwrapped in shopping bags. My absence wasn't a gap. It was a hole swallowing the entire performance. By early afternoon, the fallout had begun. Lyora, dressed in a sequined red sweater, kept stepping out of the kitchen to check her phone. I didn't know what she was reading until hours later, when screenshots arrived. We'll be going with another provider, read the message from her biggest prospective client. Heard some things? Wishing you the best. It was a polite sentence with a knife inside. Someone in her professional circle had seen my letter, the one where I wrote about being assigned tasks under her name, about her posting family tradition photos of work she never did. In a community built on image, it made her look opportunistic. I didn't feel glee when I saw it. What I felt was something closer to relief, like a curtain finally drawn back. Actions had consequences now, not just for me. Meanwhile, Dorothy had hit her own wall. In a text she sent later that night, she wrote, I can't stay here alone anymore. I'm moving in with Isolde. No emoji, no apology, just exhaustion and a decision. I could picture the scene. Mom sitting at the kitchen table, the burned ham in front of her, realizing she was the one left holding the pieces. I could picture Isolde's face freezing as the words landed. She'd spent years handing off care, duties, and obligations to me. Now, with no one else left, she was the net. In Palm Springs, Jason and I spent the day walking along the edge of the beach. The December sun was mild but kind, the sand warm under our shoes, families dotted the shoreline, children building castles while parents dozed. For the first time, I wasn't scanning for potential hazards, counting plates, or plotting schedules. Near sunset, my phone buzzed again. A video message from my nieces and nephews lit up the screen. I opened it with careful hands. In the video, they sat cross-legged on the living room floor. Wrapping paper was everywhere. Their eyes were red from crying, but they smiled shyly. "We miss you, Aunt Marlene," one of them said. "It's not the same without you." Another chimed in. "Come back next year, please?" I pressed the phone to my heart. Jason stood beside me, his hand warm at the small of my back. I recorded my reply on the balcony, the mountains behind me catching the last light of the day. "I love you all," I said gently. "But love isn't service. I'll always care for you. But I also have to care for me." When I sent it, I felt a quiet click inside, like a door finally locking in its frame. Jason handed me a cup of coffee, steam curling into the cool evening air. "They're reaching out," he said softly. "They are," I nodded. And for the first time, I'm not reaching back out of guilt. We sat there, the horizon melting from gold to indigo. My phone buzzed again, a question from one of the older kids. "Will you come back next year?" I looked at Jason and smiled, a small, steady smile that belonged to no one but me. "They asked if I'll come back next year," I said. "I told them I'll think about it." After Jason and I returned from Palm Springs, the adjustment back to normal life felt unusually gentle. There were no frantic phone calls, no backlogged tasks waiting for me, just quiet, clean laundry, dishes I didn't have to scrub off someone else's plate. 1 week after New Year's, a package arrived on my doorstep. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Leora's. Inside was a stack of holiday cards from the kids, each one in their crooked crayon scrawl. "We love you, Aunt Marlene. Please come next year. You make Christmas fun." Beneath the cards was a flash drive. Jason found me holding it later that evening, just staring at it like it might explode. "Want me to play it?" he asked. I nodded. He plugged it into the TV, and we sat together on the couch, legs tangled, silence settling between us like a blanket. The screen flickered, and there they were, 5 kids in pajamas, sitting cross-legged on a living room rug littered with wrapping paper. One held up a sign, "Come back next year, please." Another waved a cookie. "Mom tried to make your snowman pancakes," she said. They were okay. The rest of them giggled. A boy in the back shouted, "The scavenger hunt sucked without you." It made me laugh, but not the kind that twists bitter. It was soft. Sad, yes, but healing too. Jason glanced sideways at me. "You okay?" "I think so," I said. "For the first time, I think I really am." A week later, I received an email from a woman who hosted a mid-size podcast on emotional boundaries and caregiving roles in modern families. "Your story has been shared with me by 3 different listeners," she wrote. "Would you be open to a conversation on the show?" I didn't hesitate. 2 weeks after that, I sat in Jason's home office, headset on, speaking into a mic with the red recording light glowing. I told them everything, not to humiliate anyone, not to name names, but to give voice to something I knew too many women carried quietly. "I loved being helpful," I told the host, "but when help turns into expectation, into obligation, into a requirement for being loved, it's no longer generous. It's just survival." The episode aired 3 days later. The response surprised even me. Hundreds of comments poured in from women aged 35 to 70. "You told my story. I thought I was alone. My daughter sent me this. I think I finally understand her now." Dorothy called the next day. "I listened," she said. Just those 2 words. Her voice was small, tentative. "I'm sorry. I really didn't know. I should have." "I believe you," I said. And I did. She didn't ask me to come back. She didn't offer conditions. Instead, she told me she was learning how to cook for herself again, that she'd found a neighbor to help with errands, that she even tried scheduling a grocery delivery app, though she'd clicked the wrong thing and got a 20-pound bag of rice. It was the most I'd ever heard her laugh without me fixing anything. Isolde and Leora? They stayed mostly silent. No big apologies, no grand gestures, but the group thread now included their own tasks: cleanup rotations, shopping lists, meal prep signups. I wasn't tagged, I wasn't mentioned, and for once, that felt like respect. In mid-February, I booked a log cabin in Montana for the next Christmas, just me and Jason. A place with snow, a fireplace, no schedule, and no cell signal. I didn't tell anyone until October, and when I didn't justify it. "I'll be traveling again this year," I said. "We're doing something different." There were no protests. Just a quiet pause, then Mom's voice. "I hope it's wonderful." It will be. Because this time, I wasn't leaving something behind. I was walking into something that finally belonged to me. Being the helper had once defined me. It had once been the only way I felt seen. But now, I understood something deeper. Being helpful is a gift, not a duty. And love, real love, doesn't require sacrifice to be validated. "Next year," I whispered to myself one morning as snow began to fall outside the cabin window, "I won't be missing from Christmas. I just won't be there for them. I'll be there for me." Before we wrap up this story, here's something I want to leave you with. Sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of survival, dignity, and truth. Being the reliable one in the family shouldn't mean becoming invisible. Have you ever been expected to give everything while asking for nothing in return? Have you ever walked away not because you didn't care, but because they didn't? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. Thanks for watching.